Thank you for staying with us. So yes, I started out by saying the marathon's over. Yes, in how do you say it now? In principle, it's over. There is a winner. Yeah, but it's still on. Those who are still trying to catch up. So who won that race? You might ask. His name is David Bamasai, and he's from Kenya. He emerged a champion of the 2020 Lagos City Marathon. The Eldoret-born runner posted a time of 2 hours, 10 minutes, and 25 seconds, and he set a new race record. Yep. The previous record was at 2 hours, 15 minutes, 4 seconds, set by Francis Abraham Kiprotich in 2018. So this is a new record, 2 hours, 10 minutes, and 25 seconds. Wow. 5 minutes less. I wonder when the next record will be broken. Now, in the women's category, Sharon Cherop crossed the finish line in 2 hours, 30 minutes, 41 seconds to complete a clean sweep for Kenya. Yeah, Sharon's also from Kenya. So Kenya took the lead in the Lagos City Marathon. Both of them will be getting $50,000 each for their efforts. Congratulations to Bamasai, that's David Bamasai, and Sharon Cherop. Congratulations. And congratulations to all those who are catching up eventually. We'll give you the details as to who is the first Nigerian to get to the finish line. We'll let you know that in the course of the program. But enough on the race. Let's look at the other race of the polity. So, corruption. The Transparency International unveiled its yearly corruption perception index, and the verdict on Nigeria is still unfavorable despite anti-corruption agenda of the government. The body ranked Nigeria 146th out of a 180 country assessed. In the previous year, the country had gotten up to a certain mark. But then there are other things also that are happening in the country. There's a matter of security. There's also the matter of the political parties being deregistered by INEC and all manner of reactions to that. There's also the issue of governance and provision of infrastructure. How is the state of our polity? In all this mix, corruption thing, security, infrastructure, politics, how is the polity doing? So to help us have this conversation, have here in the studio Mr. Chima Nnaji, or Chief Chima Nnaji. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
It's been a while you came on the show.
Yes.
It's good to see you again.
Yes.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure being here.
Welcome. Also here to my immediate right is the Commissioner for Information, Cross River State, Asuo Kang. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And then joining us from our Abuja studio is Emmanuel Bello, who's a social commentator. Okay. We'll see Emmanuel very, very soon in our Abuja studio. So let me start with you, Mr. Nnaji. With all the potpourri of issues around Nigeria, what do you have to say?
Well, you know that if you have to begin to say, every time you have to say something about everything, then your mouth will never be shut. Because there's so much that is happening in such a frenetic speed, velocity as the case may be, and intensity that you probably may not be able to catch up. So you just be ensconced in your own little corner and be picking as they affect you most directly. But speaking very seriously, I believe that security is very fundamental. And the corollary of insecurity is a threat to life. So it had become a very topical issue, such that the entire polity is galvanized, having suffered a lot of policy somersaults in the fight, as it were, against insecurity. The polity appears to have galvanized to take things frontally. And so it has set mouths wagging. And the people in governance and at the level of government and security authorities are also not having a good sleep. So I think we have a very fundamental issue or challenge on security. And all the effort that seem to have been made or communicated to have been made appear not to have assuaged the feeling of people that they are insecure. And that is the much I can say now. The other aspects of corruption, anti-corruption, some of them, they are all related because it is the corruption that is fueling this. We have even seen that the issue of insecurity is not just that people are coming from the moon. It is that this thing people believe is an enterprise now. And since there's a business side to insecurity, those who are smiling to the banks will rather that this thing become endless. Because if you employ a firefighter as a manager, rather being sacked, he will be stoking fire to remain relevant, if you get my drift.
Okay, Asu, he said something here, and the summary of it all is, in the face of all these matters, corruption, security, politics, and all of that, there are efforts being made, but it appears the efforts are not bearing fruit. Why do you think that's so?
First, thank you for having me. Let me make one point very clear, and clearly so. There is an interrelationship between corruption and insecurity. Where you have a government in place that naturally should think towards getting the people to be secure. The insecurity in this point is not just the arm carrying by Fulani herdsmen or the kidnapping in the South or all of that. The insecurity of the future of young people. The insecurity, the feeling of insecurity of the feeling of young people. For instance, if you know where we come from, rather than invest so much on infrastructure is one of the best things to do, development of infrastructure. But development of the stomach infrastructure and getting everybody to be secure, to feel secure, not to be afraid of the unknown, not to be afraid of the future, not to be afraid of tomorrow morning, what I will eat, what anybody will have to eat, not to bother about that, is enough security for any young person, or the average Nigerian. So, where you have a government that naturally will not think towards the engagement of young people, where unemployment is on the rise, where inclusiveness of young people in governance is becoming a mirage, where young people are often told that you are the future of tomorrow, not today. And a man is 40, 45 years old and he's still not getting anything right. He's still not seeing himself being a man. He's still not seeing himself having a future to hold on to. He's still not seeing himself as having something to hold on to say, look, this is the security of my future. Everybody has an element of criminality in him or her, born from birth. Now, like one example, typical example my governor would always put up, to say, look, find yourself in one position where you have children looking up to you to eat tomorrow morning. You have a wife, you have all your children, you have family members looking up to you for food. And you have nothing to give to them, and you find your little baby dying, and you find a maize farm just close to you, even if it doesn't belong to you. There is something that will ignite the element of criminality in you, just not for the purpose of the fact that you are actually a criminal, but just to get food to save your dying child.
Food insecurity is a fuel to corruption? Is that what you're implying?
What I mean to say is that I am not justifying corruption, but I am saying that when people begin to feel constantly insecure about their future, constantly insecure about what to eat the next morning, because what are we living for in this life? Food, shelter, and clothing. Basically, those are the basic needs of life.
Okay.
Where a man cannot provide that, there is an element of criminality that is ignited.
Okay, let me swing to Abuja studio. Mr. Bello, we've heard from the two guests here. Mr. Anaji talked about the many efforts that appear not to be bearing fruit. Mr. Okan is talking about the case of insecurity, which fuels elements of criminality in the individual. Is that the situation in Nigeria's polity?
Well, thank you for having me, and it's nice to be here again to talk about these issues. Let me just go back to the first chief who spoke, with the red cap chief, who said, look, if you keep talking about issues, you find yourself talking all the time. I know we've sparred with him before. He loves proverbs, and I like that. So let me throw one of my own proverbs too. I think today in Nigeria, everybody is looking at one problem from different perspective, and it's like the six blind men that we are going to identify an elephant. Of course, some touch the tail, some touch the body, and everybody seems to have his own idea of how to deal with the situation, or in fact, the problem itself. I think what is remaining now, apart from all the beautiful opinions that we have everywhere, and everybody has his own side to the story, I think what we should be looking for now is solutions, real solutions, and talking about them, and actually helping government in understanding how to tackle the problem. There are people who say that, well, government is there on its own, it should deal with everything. But there are people also who will tell you that security belongs to everyone, if security is the issue. And when we talk about corruption too, there are people that will tell you that, look, it's not just a top-level governance thing. It's about all of us as Nigerians, what we do, what we don't do. That eventually the sum total of all this, end up being the crisis that we're dealing with. So I hear a lot of people talking in Nigeria today, and it's good that we're having this conversation, whether it's on radio or even private places or on platforms today. We should be talking. But I think as we talk about this thing, we should be going, especially for those of us who have opportunities of platforms like this, to begin to look at real solutions. And like I keep saying, let us start knowing how to define the problem, and then look at the root cause of the problem. And because if we understand the problem, we define it properly, we know where to situate it beyond sentiment, beyond emotion, beyond just trying to just fix blames instead of fixing problem. We'll be getting to some place of solutions. So public discussants like us, are tasked with that responsibility of identifying this problem, understanding what they are, and looking at the various dimensions, the historic dimension, their political dimensions, the sociological dimension, and all the dimensions to a problem. If you take security, for instance, do we have the data? Do we have...
Mr. Bello, before you get there, we will need to take a very quick break. When we'll come back, we'll look at the solutions to all of this. Please stay with us. Thank you very much for staying with us. Mr. Bello, you asked a question just before we went on that break, as in, where is the data? This matter of data captured, can you look at that a bit? What do you mean?
No, well, I'm worried that, there's a whole lot of, sometimes loose talk and, empty talk and, especially even from those of us, like I say, who have the opportunities of mounting a platform like this. But we need to be very clear about the statistics. And you cannot run a country without, clear-cut, adequate data. Or else you will actually be we need to know how to measure some of the things we are talking about. Insecurity, I just saw the report now that's done. Is that an indication that, this government or any government is winning the war on corruption? We need data like that. We need information flow, especially those of us who handle these things about information. So when I'm talking about data, I'm just saying that we shouldn't just talk. We shouldn't just have, there are people who can talk, but when people will look up to us to get clear-cut information about what is going on, then we will be really needing data, and not just feelings, not just emotions, not just sentiments, not just how we think about it, not just what we don't like or what we like, but clear-cut ideas, data. And all countries, civilized countries who are going to make any serious progress are data-based. They look at the numbers, they talk from the numbers, they look at the figures, and it's very important because figures don't lie. Data, to some extent, are near accurate, representation of what you are talking about. So we need to measure that, and that's the only way we can get about talking as we head into looking at solutions instead of focusing too much on the problem. It's good to talk about the problem. I mean, everyone can do that. We can continuously, like the first speaker said, continuously every day, continuously talk about it. But the hard work of dealing with situations, of solving problems, of moving a nation forward, of nation building, does not lie in just talking about the problem. It lies in looking for adequate data to make informed decisions and to carry it up from there. And this is not just about individuals like us talking. It's about even the policymakers in the top places of governance. Do they have all the data? Do they have the statistics? When they make decisions, when, for instance, the governor is talking about building, making roads and building hospitals and everything, is he basing that on just, wanting to score a cheap point, or is it based on accurate data? So this is very important, that when we talk, we should also look at the facts, we should look at the data, and we should be able to be very clear about what we are talking about. If not so, all we'll do, we end up doing, and in most places, that's what people do, is just to talk and talk and talk, and then we don't get to find solution. How do we head to finding lasting solution? What do we do about the problems? What are the statistics that we need to work with? What are the data? What are the information? What do we know? What's going on? And that's the place, information managers like you and I, for instance, are supposed to actually help everyone in dealing with, so that we can understand in very clear terms what we are talking about. It's not enough to just say, well, to blame the past or to blame the present or even actually to blame the future. But it's what we move this country for is when everyone begins to talk clearly about the problem in a very, very clear manner. And when we understand the problem in what it is, if we can define it rightly, then it is easy, for instance, to start to talk about solution and how to head forward. So as you look at the country and you look at security situation, you look at corruption, you look at even the problem of power or the problem of agriculture or education and everything, you need very clear-cut information and data. That's the kind of the point I was trying to make about that it mustn't be talk that is just based on emotion or sentiment or even your political cleavings or leanings, but that it has to do with what is clear. Are we making progress in a place, or are we not making progress? And if you say we're not making any progress, what are the data there? What are your information? What are the clear-cut signs that you think that matters have deteriorated?
Okay, Mr. Bello, thank you. Kingsley Uzo is saying here, he's saying that the major challenge facing Nigeria is the fact that the politicization of the horrible situation and then the blame game, Mr. Naji. In other words, Nigerians hardly face up to the truth, are not ready to face it as it is. They would rather have it blame Chima, blame Asu. But this is the situation. The glass is broken. What is the solution? Case in point, when he talked about data, the National Identity Management Commission was set up to gather data of Nigerians. And that, a lot of people have said, when we have data, we can plan, we can sort out security issues, we can sort out even this corruption matter. But without data, there's nothing we can do. What do you say?
First and foremost, let me make some partial response to what Bello said. Before a surgeon can address a tumor, he probably has to open it. Before you know what is in a parcel sent to you by a courier, you must open it necessarily. Because he recognized that I say things in proverbs or parables. And that is the shortest way of communicating. And since he decodes it, I believe he understands what I mean. 3 of us are here, for example. 3 pieces of meat in a plate of soup. The presumption is that 3 of us will be entitled to 1 piece of meat. The priority of choosing might go by age or status. And that pieces of meat may have been arranged in that order, so that the smallest and last person would take the smallest or the biggest, as the case may be. In this country, even the data he was talking about, it is government that must provide the data. The government must show leadership in collecting the data, even if it wants to mobilize the people to assist in making the data available. Government must show leadership even in the pursuit of the solution to the problem. But what we have in our own climate is that even people in government exacerbate the problem. And sometimes they even initiate the problem for political gains. Who manipulates religion? Who manipulates ethnicity for political gains? Is it the ordinary people? The ordinary Nigerians are doing fine. If you go to the street, the beggar doesn't know whether you are an Igbo man or Hausa or Yoruba. He wants money to survive. He said the existential challenge the beggar has. He needs money. That money has no color of religion or ethnicity. But when you want to use people, you tell them that you are of our own religion, we are fighting them. Then that poor man who has just received 50 naira from somebody of another religion to survive that afternoon will use the food in his stomach to carry the heinous assignment given to him by somebody who has brainwashed him because he lacks content. So he operates more in the context. So the issue about solution, every problem under the sun, whether contrived or manifesting naturally, has solution. The only thing is that you have to look for it. That's why when they give you X, Y, this is divided by this, the answer is somewhere. It's for you to look for it. If you have been taught well or you have done your research well, you find it. So the solution is with government, not even with the people. And those people who are in government are still making it difficult for the people to assist government.
How do you mean making it difficult for the
Very
people?
well.
I mentioned something about the Identity Management Commission.
I'm coming to that.
Saying something about we're doing data capture.
I'm coming
but
to
the people
that.
themselves are not willing
Identity
to.
management, just like in every other thing, is business. There's budget. Whenever there is honey somewhere, you know the kind of insects that will be perching around? Even human beings will be hanging around there because it's sweet. But bring bitter leaf water. Few people will drink it only on health grounds. What I'm saying is that whenever there is budget, especially in our climate, there is the potential for derailment is very high. How many Nigerians will just walk in to any office called National and get the card? I want to see those Nigerians. How many of them? Many people, this SIM card, you reeled out what you'll be discussing this morning. Multiple registration. I have done more than 4 registrations, data capturing, since when GSM came out. It's the same me. I never changed. And yet the data seem not to be available to be used in another template. That means we're not serious. Anybody who wants to solve these problems will address issue of identity and identification. But are we genuinely interested? Even if some people at a certain level of governance are genuinely interested, the lieutenants, are they on the same frequency? There is a lot of discordance, disconnect, manipulations and jactitations at the level of governance. And so the people themselves are confused. And just like the commissioner has said, there is an existential challenge. The man who is about to starve after 2 days of no meal. That element of criminality he was talking about, I don't want to go into the psychology of that, or even the sociology of that. But that element of that criminality, in spite of, because somebody said, putting it very succinctly, that if the priest is allowed to go hungry for too long, rather than starve, he will convert the Holy Communion biscuit to his meal. But that was not what it was intended. I don't know whether you're getting my drift. Because when you, rather than starve, there are 2 levels of aggression. Aggression turned inwards is suicide. Aggression turned outwards is the one that we recognize as aggression. Somebody you didn't do anything to, he comes to slap you, snatch your bag, and so on. He's not snatching the bag to go and buy a helicopter. It's just that because corruption defined now the fear of poverty or the fear of poverty will define how corrupt you can be. In spite of all the theories of social change and social and corruptogenics. That's grammar.
That's a new one.
That's grammar. Corruptogenics are those factors that can conduce into somebody becoming corrupt.
Okay.
Depending on the definition of corruption, not only when you steal money that you are corrupt. ethnicity, doing things for your own group at the expense of others who are equally entitled or even better entitled, it is corruption.
All right, Chief. Let me just mention here that the identity management situation is not necessarily about the card as much as about the number, getting that identity number, which a lot of people have been trying to get. The part you talked about, the lieutenant, even if some people in government want to achieve this,
Yes.
are the lieutenants on the same page with
The
them?
buck stops at their own table if they are not able to devise means of checking and control. But if it is job for the boys and you are looking the other way because you have given it to those people whom you think deserve it because of their closeness to you, then it will be possibly abused.
The matter of information, when Mr. Naji was talking, he said something, he says, because the man doesn't have content, he operates in the context. So that comes to the part about information. Many times when we're having these conversations, the fight against corruption, fight against insecurity, and all the fights, even identity management, everybody looks to federal governments. Some people will say exclusive list. Security is in the exclusive list. I mean, you're the lawyer here. But at the end of the day, the question now comes down to, what are the states even doing? Can the states say they are even giving out information to? Are the states even capturing data? Lagos State began something called Residence Registration Program at one time. Are the states doing anything? I mean, you're a commissioner of information. So let's take it from that point.
Thank you. Now, the problem with this country is that many times we are too theoretical about issues. We like to approach issues from praxis, from theories, you know, and all of those hypotheses, you know, that kind of thing. It's really not helping our country. Bello was talking from Abuja and talking about data. What is the relationship, even though there's some kind of passive relationship between data and the issues of security, insecurity, and corruption? The major issue facing us here is that when you talk about insecurity and issues of security in Nigeria, it has to do with either kidnapping and banditry, it has to do with the Fulani herdsmen, you know, hitting up on farmers and all, and then Boko Haram. Those are the major three security issues confronting us as a country. Then if you talk about corruption, you talk about corruption in government, that is in governance, and then corruption even in public agencies and perhaps, you know, individuals. So if you look at it from this trifaceted point of view, you would agree with us that, look, you will tackle them not as a whole, but, you know, as a tripod, individually. Number one, if you're talking about the issue of banditry and kidnapping, it was predominant in the south, south, most especially, with the Niger Delta area. But with all what the governors are doing there, the states are doing, you realize that some of those issues have become, you know, considerably, almost getting out-fashioned, outdated, you know, in the South-South region. How many times do you hear about kidnapping again in the South-South? Just a few cases. But it was a major stock in trade of the youth of the Niger Delta. The president brought about, all thanks to President Yaradua, late, may so rest in peace, who brought about the idea of amnesty and all of that, clearly showing that the boys who were in the swamps, the boys who were in the creeks, the boys who were in the bushes, were just doing that not because they love to stay there and live with mosquitoes and wild animals. They were doing that as a survival strategy. Provide an alternative and withdraw the arms. What happened? The alternative was provided and the arms were dropped. Kidnapping today has now moved more. It is now more predominant in the north. Kaduna is taking the lead now, recently. So, what I am saying in essence is, if the Kaduna state government, for instance, wakes up and attempts to think towards what the government in the south is doing, for instance, you find in Cross River, I'll give you a typical example. The governor came on board, wanted to do industrialization, put up small cottage industries, bigger ones everywhere in the state across the 18 local government, and decided that, look, for us to be able to get this done, you can't put a transformer, build a gas station, and put up, import equipment, and expect the equipment to remain there when the boys are hungry on the streets. They will steal the armored cables. They will steal the transformers. They will come for the diesel to pilfer, to sell. So the governor said, look, we understand the social content of this, the anthropology of this, the sociology of this part. Let's let the industrialization, while the industrialization is going on, let us first of all put food on the table. First, stomach infrastructure. And for the first time in the history of this country, we had 8,000 political appointees. One governor appointed 8,000 political appointees. Not because they had actually, most of them had actually anything to offer to government in terms of content, but just to keep them afloat. And across the 18 local governments, that happened. Today, Cross River State is one of the most peaceful states. You would hardly hear about kidnapping, banditry, and all of those. Now, if you do that and replicate that in the south, for instance, in the north, once people can have access and inclusiveness in governance, once a young man can feel that he is part of the state, once he can have that conviction that, look, as I wake up tomorrow morning, the state cares about me. The nation cares about me. They understand that I need something. I have graduated from school. I am yet to find something. The state owes me an obligation to cushion the effect of poverty. To cushion, because once a young man graduates and leaves school, there is an average Nigerian parent will begin to expect, to think that from the traditional African society where we come from, please come and take part of the responsibility. The burden and the fear of those responsibilities that naturally come with time, upon graduation and into manhood, upon graduation from school, upon graduation from the university, would naturally set in. Peer pressure, all of those sets in, and there is always that tendency to be able to commit crime. So what I'm saying in essence is that governments all over the world must be able to do something.
We'll take a moment and we'll be back shortly. Please stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. We're still having this conversation around the state of the polity. Mr. Okan was talking about the thing of stomach infrastructure that's taking care of a lot of the insecurity, and corruption would be taken care of. But again, that question of data comes into play, Mr. Okan. You didn't answer that thing about data.
Yes.
When you talked about insecurity, corruption, and even politics, you know that the question of data, if you know who is who, to a large extent, that takes care of things.
In 2018, we attempted to look at the concept of getting data for, first, all unemployed young people across. I'm talking in particular to my state of origin, where I come from, where I'm currently serving as Commissioner for Information. We established the Cross River State Job Center. Cross River State Job Center the intent of that job center was to move on, create a data bank that will be able to have a roll call of all unemployed, not just graduates, but all unemployed, whether skilled or unskilled, artisans and alike, to be able to get that database and get it done. The import of data is very important. You cannot undermine that. We cannot completely overrule that. But if you say data is the actual thing we need to be able to tackle insecurity, I will not agree with you. I don't know. For you to be able to plan to secure people, you know that there is a situation. And what are the situations? The situations, as it has to do with security, that is facing us raw, apart from other smaller things, is banditry, this and that. You don't need to go taking data of all those who are criminals to be able to know to solve the problem. It's a little theoretical.
Let me swing back to Mr. Bello. Mr. Bello, that matter again comes back to you. The stomach infrastructure will solve a lot of things. Will solve corruption, will solve insecurity. That's basically what Mr. Okan has said, and Mr. Nadi appeared to weigh in on that as well. But that matter of management, information management, and the data that you mentioned, can that help in any way to make things a lot easier?
Well, it's a good thing we are talking about solutions. And if one of my colleagues here said in their state, they'll be able to tackle a whole lot of things by making 8,000 people political appointees. I know there are other places where people will question that too and say, why are you making 8,000 people political appointees? It comes with all the baggage of wanting to, 8,000 people suddenly are now special advisors or senior special, whatever. There have been all sorts of things. There are people who have issues with that. They'll say that will also generate another kind of problem altogether. I've worked in a state before, and I understand the crisis of making somebody an SA. You have to also factor in his severance package and all of that. So, look, the point he is making is that, look, we are trying to deal with solution. In Zamfara State, the governor also, took, bold steps to deal with the problem of insecurity. But on the overall, what I'm saying is that there are no people with monopoly of solutions. So talking about it, yes, we'll continue to talk about it. And we'll begin to find, there are solutions like his that he said, look, it's only when you deal with stomach infrastructure. But there are people who also argue that, look, it's not just as simplistic as that. It's not just, putting food in people's stomach infrastructure. One governor at one time made that very popular. I don't know the success he got from that. Yes, hunger can drive people to various points. And I think government at various levels are addressing it. But let me go back to something you asked, which is where do we locate the problem? Is it only at the federal government or at the state level or at all the various levels? And I say that in looking for solutions, we have to look at everything. We have to look at the role of the federal government. We have to look at the state. We even have to look at leadership at the local government level. All that, we have to play a role. Nobody can downplay the place of data, of clear cut. There are best practices all over the world in dealing with crisis of security and crisis of corruption and everything. Technology is helping in some society. We can think to that point too. Technology is helping out in some places. How can we deal with that? Maybe it's not just enough to just deal with the problem of hunger and starvation and say, okay, if you're able to put people, if you're able to put food in their stomach, they will not think of. That's probably one way to look at it. But you must expand that discourse and expand those solutions to look at best practices across the world. What we're dealing with in Nigeria is not in isolation. It's not as if other countries have not faced them in nation building. You might say, okay, what about the political will? That too can be addressed. But like I say, it's a holistic thing. We have to look at various solutions. It's not also just enough to blame government and say the problem is with government only, basically. When you talk about leadership, you should also look a little bit towards the followership and ask yourself, what kind of followership are we dealing with? What kind of people are we talking about? Of course, government plays. People are in a social contract with the government, so government plays a very pivotal role in their lives. But people too matter, the day-to-day activity. And leadership is not just in governance. You have leadership whether at the traditional level, the family level, the church level. Leadership cuts across. So it's a huge problem. And like I'm saying that those of us who have the opportunities of talking about it or even doing anything about it must know the problem for what it is. You cannot downplay the place of data. Like we started talking and you seem to have supported that to say, look, we already know the problem. Let's just deal with it. Well, if you have a short time, if you just want to deal with the problem on a short-time basis, then you can say, yes, let's forget about certain things. But if you are thinking of building a nation, moving a nation forward, like countries that have moved from third world to first, countries that have moved from underdevelopment to, some sort of developed state, then you must be looking at real solutions, not just practices and theories. These are not theoretical. These are things that have been practiced in places. You must look to technology, for instance. You must look to science. You must look at various ways of dealing with problems. The problems of traffic, for instance. Well, how will you employ? I was in a country recently, and I saw how they were dealing with problems of traffic. And traffic is a huge problem out here too. And if you think, so it's not enough to just think of stomach infrastructure and say, look, if I deal with this problem this way, if I just get people jobs, if I just get people food and everything, the problems will be solved. No, well, they might be solved in the short time, but we have real problems. Do we need to look at the polity all over? Do we need to look at our constitution? Do we need to look at the foundation, the very foundation of our country? Do we need to negotiate the terms of our agreement? Do we need to look at problems at various levels? It's not enough to just look at the president and say, well, the problem is with him. What about the governors who are not doing very well? What about the local government chairmen who are not actually doing what they're supposed to do? What about leadership at various levels? So in looking at the polity, the point I keep saying is that it's enough to talk about every problem, but it's also important to look at solutions and to know where to fix the problem. It's not just enough to just say, okay, well, all the problems are at the federal level. States government are getting funding. There are states that will tell you that, well, we can't do anything about insecurity, but they collect huge, and I'm talking of huge security votes. And they turn around to say, look, we have no power, we're not in charge of anything here, we can't do anything. But a certain governor, the governor of Zamfara State, put a lie on that. He was able to do something, and the whole country was saying something about it. The governor of Borno State, left his comfort zone, stepped on the street, and he's doing some things. So when we are dealing with problems, the problem of a polity, it's not enough to look at just one direction. And it's even not enough to just say it is government. It's also people. It's also the followership. It's also what you and I are doing as individuals in dealing with the problem. And I think this is the kind of holistic approach that I like, instead of just trying to model issues and say, and actually really looking for whom to blame.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to read out some comments here from our viewers, and then we'll get our closing statements from everybody. But let me say this. We started a segment on the show called Social Studies, and last week we were looking at the national anthem. Arise, fellow Nigerians, all compatriots. Nigeria's call obey, to serve our fatherland, to serve, meaning that there is something that, and today we're looking at the pledge. So there has to be something that everyone's doing towards this. So let me read this comment, and then I'll get to the closing statements from everybody. At Bidixi, that's El Caballero de la Costa de Marfil, sent in this one about the identity management. It says in Cote d'Ivoire that the Nigerian embassy staff of NIMC_NG are charging about CFA 18,000 for the issuance of NIN, plus 1,000 CFA for laminating the slip. I think NIMC answered that question to say when it comes to giving out the NIN outside of the country, it's a contract given to agents, and so those guys are the ones charging you. It's not NIMC that's charging. I think they had that conversation, but we'll bring them back on the show to talk about the NIN, the National Identity Number Registration Program again. I'll appeal to the producer, see if we can do that. Enzo Uzo says, if we don't kill tribal and religious bigotry will kill us. That's Enzo Uzo. Egba Man says, Mr. Naji Singh, he says our fundamental problem is corruption. Virtually all government agencies are corrupt. The national ID has become a racket. It's a shame. Enzo again says, unless a new generation with a different mindset is born to replace this primitive set, Nigerians are likely to remain doomed forever. Pascal Ezenku says, this has encouraged regional security arrangement, which is a good idea, but if the operational framework is weak, they can lead to worse security challenges in the future. It is safer if everything is done in the confines of the police. In other words, we should reform the police. Charles Ndubisi says, we have had enough of proverbs and theories. We should start out with solutions and not be talking emotions. Kingsley Uzo, Festus Akimbo says the problem is politicians are playing politics with our security and have allowed the fear of one crime to take over our country. Time for all Nigerians to support government to tackle insecurity. These are some of the comments I can take at this point in time. So let's begin to do a wind down. And I'll start with you, Mr. Okang. Mr. Okang, another comment sent in by a viewer says, when a government is criticized for not doing the right thing and the person, a journalist who's criticizing is locked up, how does that work? When you talk about holding the government accountable, you talked about holding government accountable to social infrastructure. So a government is asked questions as regards some of the promises made and the person is incarcerated. He didn't say any name here, he said a journalist. How does that work?
I don't know why you chose to ask that question.
No, he said charging a journalist who criticized the state, your state government, is corruption.
Okay, my state government. Well, I don't know of any case where my state government is holding anybody to ransom for criticizing the government. If you're talking about the case of Agba Jalingo, which is the matter that has been mentioned a few times, let me make one point very clear. The Cross River State government has no hand in the incarceration of the journalist in Cross River. Number one. Number two is that the correctional facility that the journalist is being held is not a state facility. African prison is a federal correctional facility. That's not part two. Part three is that the judge that remanded Agba Jalingo in prison custody is not a magistrate court judge. Is not a magistrate, rather. Is a judge of the Federal High Court, only domiciled in Calabar. Fourthly, the issue at stake is that Agba Jalingo was involved in the Showore saga, during the protest. He was in Lagos, Showore was in Abuja and all. And Showore was arrested, detained. Agba Jalingo was also arrested, detained. And the question I've often been confronted with, like I've always said, is, but Showore has been released. Yes, Showore has been released. His lawyer went to court. and secured a release, a court order to release Showore from the detention of the DSS. Yes, he has been released. But show us the court order that was granted by any court releasing Agbajalingo on the same count. So you see, people get a little too emotional about this whole saga. But they have also forgotten that beyond the fact that Agbajalingo is a personal friend, is a young person like me, very vibrant and intelligent, yes, I agree. But it is not about criticizing the government. Criticizing the government for what is not doing or criticizing the government for what is done. If you talk about the 500 million naira, which everybody thinks, or some people think, some of the people who got a little emotional about the matter said it was about the 500 million naira saga with Cross River State Microfinance Bank. Governor Yade was the originator, was the progenitor of the idea of getting a state microfinance bank to finance the G-Money initiative, the Green Money initiative, and put in 500 million naira of the state fund there, just to ensure that young people. And today, in fact, in a few months, in a few days from now, President Buhari, once he returns from Ethiopia, the governor of Cross River State is there with him. He is going to come back, and then they give us an original date for the official launch of the G-Money initiative to be taken from that same 500 million, which is going to be given. So when you say you're criticizing, I don't know. I mean, the case of Agbajalingo is very clear, and I'd like to make it very clear that the government of Cross River State have no hand. The court that remanded him is a federal high court.
Okay.
The judge is a federal high court judge. The prison custody, the facility is a federal facility. So it's neither here nor there.
Okay.
And that is the
All
truth
right.
about it.
All right. Let me get to Mr. Bello. Mr. Bello, your closing thoughts. We have very little time. Mr. Bello, your closing thoughts, please, as regards state of the polity.
Well, yeah, I just want to say that, look, we can get solutions to problems. We should identify the problems, we should be very clear about them. It should be devoid of emotion. Some of these problems are very, very scientific in nature. They are not spiritual. Our problems did not come from, some of them are historical, I understand, yes, but they can be addressed. And we can only see clearly if we remove the lenses of bigotry, blame game, and, just emotions that are neither here nor there, or our tribal places. We can solve a problem. And if we're serious about the polity, we're serious about solving the problem, then we should be able to. There are best practices all over the world. There are people who have been through what we do. The country is growing. We can find these solutions and be, devoid of all the noise and the talk and everything. Get policymakers, people that are thinking very straight to do. And we can try with everything. There's nothing wrong with that. We're growing. We can try every solution. If it's from the stomach infrastructure, like my colleague said there, or from what the governor of Zamfara State are doing, or recently the governor of Borno State stepping out of his comfort zone, going into the street, almost, fighting things with his hands. We are building a nation, and when you're building anything, it's brick by brick, block by block. It's not by bickering, by fighting, by, talking back, by all that. We don't build a nation like that. And then we have to be clear. Information management have to be the centerpiece of this. We have to be very, very clear about what we are talking about, not to exaggerate the problem or to underestimate them, or to actually, blow them out of proportions, or to just try. There are people who just want to even see the escalations of crisis, because, like someone say, they benefit from it. Those who benefit from it and from darkness and the rest, they are there. So we're dealing with serious problems, and the only way we can find serious solution is by looking at serious things that are going on and getting best practices around the world, trying all sort of policies and programs that have been successful elsewhere in the world. It's not as if we're in isolation. We're not living in another planet. We're living here on this earth, and countries and nations have grown. Like in the life of an individual, there are problems.
Thank you.
But the good news there is that there are solutions.
All right, thank you. Mr. Najib, just before you come in, Suleiman Yahaya says, we don't have data about our people. We cannot deploy technology to fight security and corruption, which is the modern way of fighting the above problems. Moreover, the North is a complex region with serious problems, including lack of education. That's coming from Suleiman Yahaya. King's user says, data includes information regarding size of population and who lives where, and links the person with groups or with others. That helps in intelligence gathering to combat crime. Data is very important. And the other man that talked about the case of the journalist says, the AG, that's the Attorney General of Cross River State, took over the prosecution of the case from the police yesterday. Your closing moments, tying in all of this.
Well, let me make a general comment on the emotion as a word has been flogged in this discussion. There has to be emotions. Emotion and reason are two strange bedfellows, but they are always neighbors. At a funeral ceremony, some people will be crying, wailing, and jumping and wanting to kill themselves. Yet, just at the back, some people are planning on how to pay for entertainment of guests and which guests need to be given what and in what location. That one is reason operating, the other one is emotion. It depends at the level at which you have been so badly hit and hurt. You cannot beat a child and prevent the child from crying. It is not allowed. The child will be crying until you kill the child. And that crying is a technology of sort, which God has imputed in the child to protect that child from the ravages of the adult around, because the child cannot do anything. The same way that ordinary citizens are helpless, because Thomas Hobbes said that government is a leviathan. The ordinary people are just like flies. They can't come together because of variegated interests. And the bifurcation of this population by ethnic, religious, and other primordial factors make it difficult for them to achieve a consensus. That was why Jesse the Body Ventura, who later became a governor in one of the states in the US, he was a wrestler. He said that he was the leader of the immoral minority when he was a wrestler. And the immoral minority would always lord it over the moral majority. And that's how it plays out at the level of governance. So if we want to achieve results in this country, let people in governance come clean. Come clean. First and foremost, inform themselves about the people they are governing, understand the geographical entity they want to govern, come clean with knowledge of the processes of governance. And then they need to purge themselves of deceitful tendencies. There's so much deceit.
All right.
Shenanigans. You promise what you don't even intend, not to talk about whether you have the knowledge of driving that process.
All right, thank you very much.
So people are watching. When you are not doing this, if you promise your child biscuit, every time you do so, next time you are coming, he doesn't come greeting you.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Chima Nnaji is a legal practitioner. Emmanuel I saw kinds of Commissioner for Information Crossover said they were here in our Lagos studio. And from Abuja, we had Emmanuel Bello, a social commentator. Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your thoughts. So as we'll be back in a moment, please stay with us.